Back in high school, there was this guy, let's call him Jim, who was constantly the target of relentless bullying, even from the teachers. Jim was adventurous, artistic, and expressed himself in ways that set him apart. He never really fit in because of this uniqueness, and one teacher had a particular disdain for him and often took her anger out on him. Like most high school bullying cases, whenever he was being bullied, beaten, called names, the teachers would ignore it, and he would suffer on his own. But if he ever dared to stand up for himself, he was the one who faced punishment. Adding to his isolation, his family life was a mystery to me. He seldom spoke about it, but it was known that he came from a wealthy, yet apparently strict and emotionally distant family. There was one kid who really didn't like Jim and went out of his way to torment him. He's called Eugene. He didn't like how he was being different and trying new things and was too expressive of himself. Like the typical bully, he would gaslit Jim into thinking that he's trying too hard to look cool and to simply be yourself and to fit in. He justified his actions as just being a phase or simply telling the truth, and that he didn't hate Jim. He just didn't like him trying to be cool. He would also beat him and humiliate him. He also insulted his family and interests. Typical disgusting narcissistic bully. At that time, I wasn't fully aware, but looking back, he was a really horrible person. Even people that didn't bully him thought he was weird and didn't really want to talk to him. If he tried to talk to me, I was receptive and did my best to be kind, but I was never his friend, nor did I make an effort to become one. Looking back, I should have been kinder and done more. Jim's high school years were hell. Despite having good grades, he was mercilessly bullied throughout school. This turmoil led him down a dark path of rebellion and self-destructive behavior, including heart-wrenching episodes of self-harm and several attempts to take his own life. He somehow persevered through these darkest moments, but unsurprisingly, he didn't attend our graduation ceremony. A decade had passed since our high school graduation. At 28, I went through college, found a steady job, and settled into a comfortably ordinary life. My high school friends and I remained in touch, catching up at least annually, and I still met regularly with my closest group despite our divergent paths. Jim, however, had become a ghost from our past. He had vanished without a trace, leaving us all wondering about his fate. Although we were never close, thoughts of him lingered in my mind, especially considering the immense hardships he endured during those turbulent high school years. The 10-year reunion arrived, reuniting us with faces from a decade ago. It was a night filled with nostalgia as we indulged in reminiscing and updates. The reunion felt like a portal back to our youth, a temporary escape to when we were 18. That's when the unexpected happened. Jim arrived. Not one person had anticipated he would turn up, given his painful past and complete detachment from our school community. But there he was, impeccably dressed in a sleek black suit, holding a bottle of expensive whiskey and a glass. People that noticed stared at him in awe and surprise. He was dressed so well, but no one had ever imagined him to turn out this way. Some felt happy for him, some thought he became a junkie or died, and were shocked by how well he seemingly turned out. He was taller than I remembered. He had a late growth spurt and grew taller, and walked tall and proud. He had glowed up significantly since high school with clear skin and nice mid-length hair. Seemingly unfazed by the stares, he walked in, sat down at one of the tables, poured a glass of whiskey, and started drinking as he watched the crowd. Some people tried talking with him and make amends for 10 years ago. I talked with him briefly and he seemed much happier and content. He seemed like nothing like he was in high school. He spoke very eloquently and was very kind with no anger or grudges from high school. It looked like he had moved on completely from those dark days and finally found happiness. I was happy for him and wanted to learn more about him. He told me he is now CEO of a big company and is very wealthy and busy, but wanted to come here to surprise people, remind himself of where he came from and how far he had come. I was genuinely surprised by how well he turned out. If I was him, I would never have showed my face or talked to anyone from high school ever again. Eugene, emboldened by the laughter of his old group, walked over to Jim and interrupted us. With a loud, mocking tone and cruel smile, Eugene began to mock him like the old days and asked him why he was still trying to be cool. His words were sharp and cruel and extremely disrespectful. Jim felt a rush of emotions, anger, humiliation, and a profound shock that after all these years, Eugene hadn't changed. His fists clenched at his sides, his body trembling slightly with the effort to control his fury. For a moment, he was that same vulnerable boy from high school, reliving the torment. Tears welled up in Jim's eyes, blurring the sneering faces around him. He felt trapped, the weight of the past and the present, merging into a suffocating reality. He looked around and checked all our faces one last time. Then, with every ounce of dignity and pride he still had, Jim turned away from Eugene, his steps unsteady as he headed for the exit. He mocked him, saying someone like him shouldn't be drinking whiskey and that drinking whiskey doesn't make him cool, as he reminded him that he left the whiskey bottle behind. The rest of the night was still fun. Many of us laughed briefly about Jim being the weirdo and still didn't like him. A few thought it was unnecessary. I felt bad, honestly. 6 months had passed. We were all back to our ordinary everyday lives and kept in touch. Jim disappeared and no one heard from him again. Eugene recently got married and came back from a honeymoon with his wife in the Maldives. This trip looked so nice it could be featured on Instagram travel pages and make Instagram influencers feel jealous. He was ready to start a new beginning as a married man and to start a new family. It seemed to an ordinary Monday morning. He woke up early, had breakfast, and was getting ready to go to work. He went to his car to get to work. However, there was something very off that day. In front of his house, a group of men stood sharply dressed in black suits and wearing sunglasses, an unusual sight in his typically quiet neighborhood. They resembled bodyguards, their demeanor professional yet imposing like men in black. "Eugene!" one of them called out, his voice deep and authoritative, yet not overtly threatening. "Yes, how can I help?" Eugene replied, his confusion evident. "We need you to come with us, please," the bodyguard said. His tone was firm, yet there was a hint of urgency rather than intimidation. "What is this about?" Eugene asked, his defenses rising. "We represent a client who requires a private consultation with you. It's a matter of sensitive nature and your expertise is urgently needed," the bodyguard explained, maintaining a professional demeanor. "It's not something we can discuss here. Please understand, this is a matter of confidentiality." Eugene hesitated, his mind racing. "I can't just leave. I have a busy day ahead." "We understand, Eugene, but we assure you this won't take long. We have informed your office that you will be attending an urgent, unforeseen meeting. Everything has been arranged for your absence," the bodyguard reassured him. The bodyguard's demeanor was firm yet respectful, making it clear they weren't there to harm him, but rather to escort him for an important, albeit mysterious, reason. Curiosity piqued and reassured by the bodyguard's explanation, Eugene reluctantly agreed. "All right, but this better be as important as you say." He followed the bodyguards to a sleek, black van. The fleet of cars started up, moving in unison, leaving Eugene's ordinary Monday morning far behind. They arrived at a building isolated from the city but close to the school we went to. They stepped out of the car and went inside the building and upstairs. It seemed to be under renovation. As they entered, the interior echoed the exterior's cleanliness and order. The floors shone with a recent polish and the walls were adorned with neutral-toned paint, giving off a professional yet sterile vibe. However, what struck Eugene the most was the silence and emptiness. The hallways were void of the usual signs of occupancy. No buzz of conversation, no movement of people, just an eerie silence. "Please wait here," instructed one of the bodyguards, gesturing towards a room on the upper floor. The room was minimalistic with a few chairs and a table, but devoid of personal touches or decoration. It felt as if it was seldom used. The bodyguard's next request was straightforward. "Give us your phone, please." "Why?" "It's for security purposes. This is a secret area, and we do not allow phones or personal electronic devices in here for confidentiality and privacy reasons." That sounded weird, but he came all the way here, and he knew nothing good would happen if he said no. So he just gave his phone to the bodyguard. "Thank you. He will be here soon. Please be patient." Finally, after an agonizing wait, Jim stepped into the room. Dressed in a luxurious charcoal three-piece suit, he exuded confidence and control. "Hi, Eugene," he greeted with a wide, disarming smile. Eugene, caught off guard, blurted out, "Jim, what is this?" Jim, smoothly bypassing Eugene's agitation, engaged in small talk. "How have you been? Your marriage? The honeymoon? How's your wife? Your family?" Eugene, struggling to keep his composure, replied tersely, "It's good. All good. Now what do you want? Why am I here?" "You see our school there?" Jim said as he looked over the school from the office. "Yeah, I remember. 10 years ago. What about it?" "You remember what you did to me, right? 6 months ago, and in that shithole of a school?" Jim's voice was a mix of sadness and underlying bitterness. "This is why I'm here? Just get to the point," Eugene snapped. "I've been thinking about the pain and humiliation you caused me. It's been hard to let go," Jim said, his tone shifting from sad to sinister. Eugene, unrepentant, retorted, "You were always the weird one. Kids do stupid shit all the time. It was just a phase. It was 10 years ago. Get over it." Jim's voice was steady but charged with emotion. "That's not very nice. It was really painful and traumatizing. I want you to apologize. Tell me you're sorry." Eugene scoffed. "You think I'm going to apologize? I'm leaving." As Eugene moved to leave, one of the bodyguards stepped in front of the door. "Where do you think you're going?" Jim said. Eugene's anger flared. "I'm getting out of here. I don't want any part of your sick games." Jim's grin was cold. "No one leaves without my permission. You still owe me." "Fine, I'm sorry. Are you happy now?" It was obvious he was only apologizing just to get out of there. "That was very insincere and disrespectful. I'm rather offended by that," Jim replied, clearly offended. "Yeah, I'm sorry for that too. I'm gonna go now. Don't ever talk to me again." Eugene was already furious and tried to step out, but the bodyguard refused to let him out. "You really hurt my feelings," Jim continued with a now sinister tone. "Yeah, I did. But I'm sorry, okay? I'm going to go now." Eugene now sounded desperate. "You're not leaving this place without a genuine apology," Jim continued, now with a clearly menacing voice and expression that clearly hid his rage. "That was extremely insincere. I want a genuine apology from you. So now I'm going to get it from you one way or another." Another man entered the room pushing a trolley with an array of tools. Hammers, chainsaws, knives, ropes, axes, screwdrivers. But now they were obviously not going to be used for their intended purposes. Jim's voice was a mix of regret and resolve. "I was ready to forgive you. I really was. If you had got on your knees and said sorry, I was going to put all of this behind us, forgive you, and move on, but you didn't. But then again, if we could solve everything with forgiveness, why do we have laws? Why does punishment exist? You need to be punished for everything you did to me since we were in high school. Did you ever stop and think for a second how that made me feel? The damage, the pain, the trauma. I spent years in therapy trying to get my life back together. All that abuse I got in school by you and the others. Having to deal with my parents' absence. And then, eventually, their death. Having to take over the family business." Eugene, now pale with fear, tried to speak. "Jim, look, Jim interrupted and continued, now sounding clearly angry. "I somehow managed to keep the nice part of me alive. 6 months ago, when you again humiliated me, even though I decided to get revenge on you, I tried telling myself to stop this. And now today, I was ready to forgive you. But that's over. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Actually, I will be nice to you one last time. Choose how you would like to be punished." Eugene's bravado crumbled, replaced by a dawning realization of his perilous situation. He dropped to his knees, his voice trembling. "Jim, please. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't think. Please." Jim's response was devoid of empathy. "Too late to apologize. Choose. As Jim methodically described each tool and its intended purpose, Eugene's fear escalated. The final option presented was a long, thick cane. Each stroke represents 1 month of pain I endured because of you. 10 years and 12 months in a year, so 120 strokes. Eugene, now visibly shaken, struggled to make a choice. His voice was barely a whisper as he opted for the cane, seeing it as the lesser of evils. "Wise choice. Let's get started," Jim said with glee, ecstatic to torture him. "You're going to regret this, you freak. You think you'll get away with this? I'm going to kill you after this," screamed Eugene. This attempt of a threat was so cringe, not even a baby would be intimidated by it. "We'll see about that. Strip," ordered Jim. "What?" Eugene responded. "Take off all your clothes. I'm caning your skin, not your clothes." Jim responded with a bright but unsettling smile. He took off all his clothes except his underwear. He was clearly trying to fight his fear, and even fight Jim, but his fears and desire to cry were overwhelming. "I told you to strip. That includes your panties. Take them off," Jim said in a soulless tone. "This is enough. Just get it done and over with," Eugene cried. Jim grinned, took out a remote controller and turned on the TV. It showed live body cam footage of a man in a van parked outside a house. "That's your mother's house." He saw the TV and his heart stopped, as it was indeed his mother's house. Jim switched videos to another live body cam footage outside another house. "And that's your sister's house." Eugene was now crushed by fear, sweating profusely and thinking whether to scream or cry. Jim knew everything about Eugene's family members and where they live. He was threatening them if Eugene did not comply. "Yeah, that's right. You insulted my mother and she died before you could apologize to her. So I will kill her, and every woman you love, if you don't do as I say." "Okay, please don't hurt my family. I will do as you say, but you will regret this one day." Jim called the men and ordered them to spare Eugene's mother and sister. He bent over and rested his chest on the table, while the bodyguard strapped his arms to the sides of the table. His head was tilted upwards in a very uncomfortable position, so he would be looking at the mirror and be forced to watch the terrifying reflection of Jim caning him. Jim grabbed the cane with a big grin on his face like he was looking forward to it. He started swinging the cane at Eugene. At first the strokes were soft, to warm up his muscles. Eugene didn't make a sound, as if he was just being poked. He thought he could easily get through this. However, he soon found out that he was dead wrong. Each stroke became harder and more painful. The sounds made when the cane landed on his skin was like a lightning strike. Each stroke was like a gunshot, and the skin started to tear up and bleed. He was flinching by this time. Not long after, flesh was flying off his skin and he was screaming in raw, agonizing pain. It looked and felt more gory than any horror film. Blood was exploding out of his butt cheeks like a volcano, and the floor was a puddle of his blood. He realized 120 cane strokes was not the same as being slapped 120 times. He realized that there was literally no chance of him getting through this. He knew he would die before the 120 strokes were done. He eventually burst into tears and cried like a little baby. "I'm sorry," he repeated multiple times, barely heard from the waterfall of tears. "Oh, now you're sorry," Jim said with a smirk. "I'm sorry?" He desperately pleaded for his life. "You're only sorry because you feel hurt," Jim said. "You're not genuinely sorry. You're saying sorry to get me to stop." Eugene continued to beg, tears rolling down his eyes and crying hysterically. "Really? If you really were sorry, you would get all 120 strokes now as promised." Jim replied, devoid of any emotion or empathy. Eugene continued to insist he was sorry as he hysterically cried like a baby. His cries brought shivers. He laughed and said, "So should I hurt your mother, sister, or wife instead?" No, please don't, please." "Well, someone's got to finish off the punishment. You or them. Please don't hurt them. They did nothing wrong to you. I will take any punishment, just please don't cane me any further. Please, I am begging you." "Sure, lick my shoes," Jim laughed. The bodyguards untied Eugene and threw him onto the ground. The once proud, confident, and strong man, now reduced to a hollow, spineless coward, didn't even resist. He went on his knees and started licking the soles of Jim's shoes like ice cream, slurping while crying, tears falling from his eyes like waterfall. After a few minutes, Jim checked his shoes and laughed. "Now my shoes are dirty with your saliva. You have any idea how dirty your saliva is? And do you have any idea how expensive these shoes are? They're worth more than your rent. How are you going to pay for this?" But you told me to clean them by licking them," he cried. "You can make up for it, though. Sing our school song and dance to it." So he stood up, which itself was now extremely difficult. His blood and flesh had been physically stripped away from him, along with his dignity and pride. He started dancing while singing and crying simultaneously. He was made to dance in various humiliating positions while struggling to move. He struggled to even move his legs properly due to his wounds. His words were like a drowning person, barely staying afloat in the ocean. Jim kept torturing Eugene and made him do other horrendous things to make up for the remaining canes, such as pouring vodka over his wounds to sterilize his wounds and waterboarding him with vodka. He concluded the torture by giving him a towel to clean up, not himself, but the blood off the floor. Whatever was left on the floor after cleaning up, he was forced to lick the blood off. "Now, do you understand how I feel?" Jim sighed with a sense of catharsis. "Do you finally understand the pain I suffered all those years?" Eugene kept crying and apologizing, begging for his life. Jim then gave Eugene a firm warning. "Don't you ever come near me. If you even think of trying anything, I will kill all the women you love. If I even hear your name, I will destroy you. Do you understand?" Eugene swore on his family's life he was sorry, and that he will never cross paths with Jim again. He was running out of tears to shed. He had cried more that day than he ever did in his lifetime. "And whatever happened here, stays here. You are not to tell a single soul about this. If I ever hear you telling anyone about this, you will be watching your entire family die. Do not try to test me. You can never escape me. I can do far worse things to you than your worst nightmares. Do you understand?" Still hysterically crying, Eugene swore on his family's life that he will never tell anyone. He told his bodyguards to go treat his wounds and just tell the doctor it was a freak accident. "Thank you so much, Jim. I will do everything as you say." He whimpered as he realized he saved both himself and his family. That night, after the harrowing encounter, Eugene was driven home by the bodyguards. They tended to his injuries and ensured he was presentable before he entered his house. The warmth of his wife's greeting, her smile and tight hug, brought him a much-needed sense of relief. He was grateful that his family was safe, that his ordeal had somehow protected them. As he stepped inside, Eugene noticed the array of new items: a brand new TV, speakers, sleek furniture, and decorations. His wife, beaming with excitement, showed off their new phones, gifts from Jim. Eugene's heart sank as he realized the extent of Jim's manipulation. His wife, oblivious to the true nature of these gifts, shared how Jim's employees had visited earlier, setting up the new electronics and explaining they were tokens of gratitude for Eugene's outstanding job for a wealthy client. That night, Eugene was alone with his thoughts, the day's events replaying in his mind. The contrast between the physical pain he endured and the lavish gifts was disorienting. He considered confiding in his wife, but the memory of Jim's chilling threats and cold gaze stopped him. Overwhelmed, he retreated to his car, seeking solitude. There, in the quiet of the night, he broke down, tears streaming down his face as he grappled with the reality of his situation, eventually crying himself to sleep. The most harrowing aspect for Eugene was the fact that we were aware of his torture, yet none of us dared to help Eugene. We were terrified of Jim's wrath and power, and crossing him was unthinkable, as it meant losing everything we had. One day, the same men in suits and sunglasses came to my house, asking me to come with them to meet Jim. Feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity, I followed them. I was the last person to arrive, and when I looked around, I realized something. Everyone there were the people that mocked or laughed at Jim at the reunion. When Jim was looking around, he was actually looking at the faces and remembering the people that had mocked him. When I later questioned Jim about why I was summoned, his response was chilling. To show you what happens when a kind person is angry. Jim unveiled his truth. He was not just our former classmate. He was the sole heir to his family business, an empire of wealth and influence. As he recounted his past, the image of the boy we knew from school faded into the shadow of the man before us. His parents, preoccupied with their vast business, had been largely absent, leaving Jim to fend for himself against the cruelties of school life. Their untimely death in a car crash had forced Jim to abandon college life and step into his role as successor, guided by his late parents' advisors and while undergoing intensive therapy. The revelation of his family's vast power and connections was startling. Jim had remained an enigma during school, his true potential and reach hidden beneath the surface. Now, he stood before us, a figure of immense authority, connected to the upper echelons of society. Police, politicians, lawyers, bankers, and more. Jim, once vulnerable and defenseless, had transformed into an untouchable figure. The meeting's atmosphere shifted from one of revelation to horror as Jim presented a video. It was a graphic display of Eugene's torture, a chilling demonstration of Jim's wrath. The room fell into a stunned silence, the air thick with shock and fear. The canes sounded like gunshots and made me physically cringe. Seeing that actually happen was more horrifying than any horror movie I've seen or scary story I've heard. Some of my former classmates broke down in tears, while others even puked. He spoke with a chilling calmness about retribution, stating that Eugene's punishment was a mere echo of the suffering he had endured. He believed Eugene needed to experience the pain firsthand to truly understand the consequences of his actions. He further insisted that such extremes were never his initial intent. Jim had been on the brink of forgiveness, ready to let go of the past. But as Eugene refused to apologize, he immediately switched his view and saw Eugene as irredeemable, someone who had to be punished severely to grasp the gravity of an apology. "Do you really think a king would forgive a peasant that attempts treason?" He posed the question. He started to lecture us about his position in society and hierarchies. Do you think society and hierarchies have changed? No, they've always been the same. Nature does not change. Survival of the fittest. There is a hierarchy in every society and culture. It has always been like that and always will be. Equality, that's bullshit. Some people are superior to others. Some countries love to preach how equal and egalitarian they are, but they are still hierarchical in some way. I am a king, and you are all dirty peasants. Do you really think you can dare commit treason and get away with it? He challenged us to consider the forces that shaped his actions, urging us to look beyond the surface. Before you call me evil, ask yourselves, who made me do this and why? He leaned forward, his voice earnest. People aren't just good or bad, it's never that simple. Sure, there's darkness in me because of my past, but I am mostly good. I run a corporate empire encompassing multiple successful businesses. I treat and pay my employees well. I've set up charities, built schools, funded hospitals, and fund research to develop cures and fight diseases. I fight against bullying, not just with words but with actions that make a real difference so no kid suffers the pain I did. His gaze hardened as he continued. So you think I'm a bad person for dealing with Eugene? No. I did what had to be done, to take out the trash, to clean up the mess that others ignored. To stop evil, you can't just stand by. You must take action. And sometimes that action is hard and dirty. And yes, I've become tough, maybe even ruthless, but unlike those who hurt me, I use my power to do good, to protect, to lift others up while also making sure people know their place. He stood up, his presence dominating the room. You all stood by back then, did nothing. Or maybe you were part of the problem, and now you're here, scared because I did something about it. I stepped up. I became the wolf to protect the pack. Not just to lead it, but to shield it from harm. He suddenly screamed in monstrous rage and furious anger. How dare you do that to me? You think you're better than me? It caught us off guard, and now we were terrified beyond words. Now in a calm but menacing voice, Jim asked us, "Anybody who still has a problem with me or want to tease me, say it now." The room was so silent I could hear the fast heartbeats of the people around me, absolutely terrified and in fear of Jim. "Does anybody want to challenge me then? Does anybody want to take Eugene's side?" Jim asked again. Again, nobody dared to speak up. Now the heartbeats were getting faster, and I could hear the sweats drip off their foreheads. "Okay, so none of you have a problem with me? Good. I will take your word for it. But remember, if you dare challenge me outside, you will meet the same fate as Eugene, but only 100 times worse, since it means you lied about having no further problems with me in this room right now, and I don't like being lied to." In the end, Jim demanded a final act of submission. He forced us all to our knees in a display of his dominance and made us beg him for forgiveness. We were to avoid any interaction with Eugene, speak nothing of the day's events, and never cross Jim. We complied, our voices barely above whispers, just thankful to leave the room with our lives. I knew none of us would even try anything. After that day, we never spoke of that incident, and we slowly drifted apart. Years after that fateful meeting, I progressed in my career and moved to a different company. In a surprising turn of events, I learned that the company where I had landed was operated by none other than Jim. In time, we reconnected and our relationship grew. He thanked me for being one of the few people that didn't treat him with disgust and treated me with the same kindness he had shown at the reunion, that brief moment before the altercation with Eugene. His generosity was abundant, and while I was grateful, I was always careful not to overstep the boundaries with him. Whatever happened to Eugene? After that day, I never spoke to him again, but Jim had Eugene wiretapped and tracked, and had someone tracking him. He told me that Eugene had a daughter soon after and seemed to be moving on from the torture, but secretly got into drugs. One day, his employee alerted him of Eugene being divorced. Jim made sure Eugene was left with nothing, assigned one of his best lawyers to Eugene's wife, and had all the top lawyers turn Eugene away. He organized him to be blacklisted professionally, and his business, which had shown promising potential, was turned to dust. He lost his house, his business, and his family, then spiraled down with mental and drug problems, ending up in a mental hospital indefinitely. Jim also helped Eugene's former family by paying for their mortgage, daughter's tuition fees, and hired the wife in one of his businesses, in good faith, to ensure they prosper and become nothing like Eugene. Jim warned me to steer clear of Eugene, saying there was no reason to visit him. I asked him why, and he simply replied, "Well, he's afraid of sitting, he's drugged up and barely cognizant like a zombie, and even hearing my name or seeing my face makes him cry and scream in pain." When I asked Jim if he felt any remorse, he just laughed. "Not a bit," he said. "Eugene's suffering is his own doing. He deserves every bit of it." He admitted that revenge indeed felt good and brought closure to him, and the moral high ground people take when saying revenge is bad is 100% bullshit. He says revenge is most effective when it's unexpected and decisive, and that is must be done with such impact so that they will fear to the point they won't even thinking of striking back. He embodied the principle that while respect is fundamental, it is essential to know how to use your power for defense, for establishing authority, and for making it known that you are not to be messed with. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. I understand his hatred for Eugene, and I would have felt the same way too. But it's painful to even think about how painful, tragic, and dark it has been for Eugene. Having your life irreversibly ruined and destroyed beyond repair, losing everything, having your soul and humanity stripped away from you like that, being confined to a mental hospital for life. It's a fate worse than death. I've come to agree with and learn from Jim about many things. They say the man with nothing to lose is the scariest person in the room, but that's not true at all. The powerful man with everything, when angered, is by far the scariest person. Jim is indeed unstoppable and can destroy anyone that would dare to hurt him. He is the kindest person in the room and commands respect from everyone, but he can also make everyone fear him. The saying that the nicest person is the scariest when angry is absolutely true. He taught me that it's best to be respected, Being loved and trusted and reciprocating this is the greatest feeling. I get so much pleasure from helping others and watching people grow. But when people disrespect you, you should make them fear you. It's better to be feared than disrespected. I sometimes think about how different Jim could have been if life had been kinder to him, if he hadn't been bullied, if he had just one friend. Maybe I should have been that friend. I'm sorry, Jim. I'm sorry for not being there for you when we were kids. Jim allowed me to share this story, with the caveat that he would check what I wrote. What I am sharing with you is permitted by him, and any details are disclosed or omitted at his discretion. This is the first time I'm sharing this story to anyone. My feelings for Eugene are complicated. There's disgust, sure, but also pity. It's a dark, painful story,